hours.
Yes, good for another year.
Oh my word.
Less than 24 hours they hire.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
It's a job working
You wanna date it for me?
Wow.
Today is the,
for data collection
It is.
yes.
full benefit. It's
Hello.
You're the using the problem.
acknowledging software.
I can get dates this year, so give me the
Great.
problem.
That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Such a good gig.
Yeah.
I know, we didn't know, we were trying to figure out,
Yeah.
where should we
Well, I'm
sit,
glad
who,
it worked out. Sounds
so.
like a perfect scenario.
Hey there.
And it won't interfere with any of the
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Glad you're here, we missed you last night.
Excellent.
That's
great.
How you doing?
Well, I know.
How's it going?
Yes, it was a Thursday, yes, of course. I was there with some friends.
Good.
Brought us down for today, huh?
You went there? Oh, yeah.
Brought us down here for today.
Waiting, we don't have.
This is, we never know how long these things are gonna last, but I do probably have to leave at 6 o'clock if it
Well,
gets
it should be done by then.
Yeah, I think
We've
it'll
got
look
two
pretty easy.
cases on historic and then that presentation, which is just informational will be after. This is your last meeting too.
Is that right? Okay.
You didn't apply for the next time.
Yeah. I did. Okay. They hadn't said anything about reapplying, so I didn't.
The option was there. I don't know who has or how many people have. How's everything on the?
Tom, I see you're getting some new neighbors.
That's being us.
Oh, y'all did take it over?
We bought another controversies that are we put a little landscape on the front gates. Yeah. So that's
Each
something new.
individual or the main things?
The one up on Laurel Street and then the one down on Gaston. Just a little bit of,
Notice.
just a little bit of space in it there. What else is new?
Several new
They
homes.
got
Some mornings I would have to park in front of that.
the guys who's been, I think, living there illegally for about 2 years or 3 years now,
Hey,
paying
Bill.
taxes.
Good, I'm about to send you a bill for,
He didn't have a
$100.
CO, but he was living there. And since it wasn't a finished house, I
about to send you a bill for $900.
full taxes. So anyway,
I
I got a police sticker over it.
Work in the hospital doing
I guess that would be some news.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we've got several, two new houses.
It's much
I've
cheaper
got
than
one next to
Chicago.
me that is.
We're bringing them down here.
This is
Per person, we get one slot.
Oh, that'd be great.
Couple meals,
guy,
included, we're doing it at Michael's, behind my office.
he works for LS.
You'll be getting a letter. You were gonna get it this week, but it'll be next week, but it's still 29th and 30th.
Blanding.
Same way with Farca Tech,
Lives
so they
there
gotta
now.
come.
He's built that one right here next to me on Wayne Street.
We,
Hey, Tom. All right, man.
I don't know where they got you.
Good. Been with the new. I'm trying my best too. Goodness, I've been seeing all the stuff online, but we can only pray and hope. Historical.
Hello, Paul.
Hey, Paul,
What's up?
are y'all gonna submit on the architectural portion for the museum?
Yeah, and what?
We are, I thought we already had that.
Even though
I thought he signed us up already for the CA part. Yeah.
That was my recommendation.
Yeah, they took the engineering and they split it. They gave GMK the
That wasn't.
electrical and mechanical. We got
what right did they have?
the structural to hold the canopy up and the architectural CA. Not a real big job.
Main Street or historic?
I suggested y'all do it all.
Yeah, well, good. We could-
I know what's behind the kit there.
Still
I don't know the other team.
GMK.
Oh my God.
We haven't done anything with them since
Today, if
we
you
quit doing work together.
I prefer that you leave the room.
Val and I did not intend on good.
In fact, I've been cautioned about that for all of us. There was a case recently where I didn't leave. I didn't know. Yeah, they would prefer that we do.
How you doing, bud?
We had a mock Jacob survey,
Oh, yeah?
and it was obvious that we needed to do a little better evaluation and training for non-members.
Yeah.
And so we identified those that we wanted to.
Just got off the phone.
How you doing? Oh.
We'll know after attending who didn't get in that grade.
Yes, I saw it,
Well,
or
what-
saw him in my email right before I left, so I appreciate
You like, I would go to that.
it. Nice to see you.
You need
Who's
to,
the best person?
normally, I would say whoever is responsible.
It's not like a lot of like it's gonna have a Wake House with Steve Benjamin.
Those people that want to rotate.
And he
How you doing? Yeah.
my
Suggestions.
concerns, you know, because I'm an open trade, but I think the real fear is
You're involved in
his choice of cabinet
in portions of
Well,
this
different
will
venues.
spill over into the business area.
Yeah, I know we did.
The better portion.
I know
Some of
that
the
one of
things
our
that
projects,
we
I had to
had
recuse myself, so it's like I had to go sit on the windowsill.
When JACO comes in, they inspect by institutional standards. Joint Commission for Accreditation of Healthcare Organizations. You lose that, you lose your reimbursement. Close the doors.
It's pretty thorough.
In construction, it's easy. Ashby's got to send somebody.
It's the easy one to get in trouble over, or?
In construction is an easy job.
Oh, yeah, that would make sense. I think we're finally getting ready to start the orthopedic one.
Doesn't it?
Hey, Robin.
Yeah, and he's not getting buy-in from Mexico. However, he thinks he
This might be my last one.
yeah, we're in for a real roller coaster.
My concern is
Hey, how are you, Latoya? I'm getting that here now again. I got
I don't think you.
the higher the hair, the closer to Jesus. This is what they say.
But it is amazing. He coming into office with no experience politically does have both sides of the house.
Any movement on the other?
I mean, it's just,
Let me know if I can help.
well, I know that too, sure. He's absolutely. All right, I don't have a gavel.
Use your shoe. Can't use your coffee cup.
Yeah. All right, folks, we are approaching the 4 p.m. hour. If we can get people to settle, please. I'll give us just a few more minutes, maybe 2. How are you? Hey, John.
Hey there.
Yeah. Folks, keep in mind on the commission here that our mics are in front of us on the tabletop, so please don't put your papers on those. And you'll probably have to speak up a little more than we're used to so that it carries forth. Okay, so your voices carry. The presentations will be made from the podium. Amy will open us up from there. Please, everyone in the audience as well, have your phones turned off to silent or vibrate, if you will. think we will begin. It is 4 o'clock here on November 10th, 2016. This is the November meeting of the Design Development Review Commission here in the Mayor's Conference Room today of City Hall. I now call us to order. The Design Development Review Commission is made up of volunteers with expertise or interest in historic preservation and design. We generally meet on the second Thursday of the month to review cases. The commission is supported by the city's urban planning and our historic preservation staff who are here today. Please let them know if you have any questions, taking care not to impede the proceedings. The meeting generally proceeds with staff calling the case and describing it. The applicant may come forward to add to the basic description of the request if necessary. If so, please try to keep your presentation to less than 10 minutes. The commissioners will then have the opportunity to ask questions. And after this period, I will ask if there is anyone in the audience who wishes to speak for or against the proposal, and audience comments shall be kept to 2 minutes per person. If there is, the applicant will have an opportunity to respond, and this rebuttal shall be kept to 5 minutes. In most of the cases, we will make a decision tonight after all information has been presented. If your case is denied, or if you feel that our decision was made in error, you and anyone with standing have the opportunity to appeal it within 30 days of the decision. All decisions of this commission are based on existing guidelines and ordinances. If you plan to speak about a specific project, you must have signed in. I believe the sheet will be at the podium for anyone wishing to do so. If your case is denied, or if you feel that our decision was made in error, you and anyone with standing have the opportunity to appeal within 30 days of the decision. That's a repeat. Please note that these meetings are streamed live, recorded, and broadcast. So please use discretion with any personal information you choose to share in the course of these proceedings. And again, all motions and decisions are made while applying all of the facts to all of the guidelines. Will every person or anyone who wishes to speak at these proceedings please stand and raise your right hand? Do you affirm to tell the truth in the proceedings? Thank you very much. Have a seat and welcome. Will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Bachnight?
Here.
Ms. Great? Here. Mr. Gressett?
Present.
Mr. Herger?
Here.
Mr. Cohn?
Here.
Mr. Powell?
Here.
Mr. Savory?
Here.
Mr. Wynn?
Present.
We have quorum.
Thank you very much. Does the agenda still stand?
We've had a few changes since publication of the agenda. Under the regular portion, 1701 Main Street, which is a request for approval for site improvements at the Richland County Courthouse in the City Center Design Development District, has been withdrawn. 933 Main Street, a request for both site plan approval for new construction as well as for design approval for new construction in the City Center Design Development District, has been deferred. And under the historic portion of the agenda, 2130 Senate Street, which was a request for approval for changes to approved plans on new construction in Old Shandon, Lower Waverly, has been withdrawn.
Thank you very much. The Design Development Review Commission uses a consent agenda to approve non-controversial or routine matters by a single motion and vote. Examples of such items include residential site improvements such as fences, minor exterior changes, or signage. If a member of the DDRC or the general public wants to discuss an item on the consent agenda at the beginning of the meeting, that item is removed from the consent agenda and considered during the meeting. The DDRC then approves the remaining consent agenda items. Will you read the consent agenda, please?
Certainly. All consent agenda items under the historic portion of the agenda this month, starting with 1121 Daly Street, a request for approval for a porch enclosure in the Melrose Heights Oakland Architectural Conservation District. 1621 Main Street and 1625 Main Street, a request for site plan approval for the construction of 6 residential units in the National Register District and the City Center Design Development District. 1621 Main Street is a request for approval, design approval for exterior changes and for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill. Again, this is in the National Register District as well as the City Center Design Development District. 1625 Main Street, request for design approval for exterior changes and for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill. Again, National Register and City Center Design Districts. 1504 through 1508 Main Street, a request for a certificate of design approval for exterior changes and for preliminary certification of the Bailey Bill. This is an individual landmark. 1923 through 25 Pickens Street is a request for a certificate of design approval for exterior changes and preliminary certification of the Bailey Bill, and this is in the Landmark District.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. Additionally, we did move minutes approval to this section of the agenda, so these are going to be handled under the consent agenda with everyone's approval.
Correct, and these minutes would be for the October meeting, which we had last month, the October 13th DDRC meeting. Is there anyone wishing to remove an item from the consent agenda? Is there a motion to accept the consent agenda as it's been presented, as well as the minutes from the October 13th meeting?
Mr. Chairman, based on the recommendation of staff, I make the motion that we accept the consent agenda as presented, along with the various recommendations that staff has made per item.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gressett. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? There being none, will you call the roll, please, for a vote?
Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Ms. Grate?
Yes.
Mr. Gressett?
Yes.
Mr. Herger?
Yes.
Mr. Cohn?
Yes.
Mr. Powell?
Yes.
Mr. Savory?
Yes.
Mr. Nguyen?
Yes.
The motion passes.
Very good. So we've had approval of minutes from past meeting. We've had approval of the consent agenda. And we'll now move on to the regular agenda and its cases.
The first case is 1634 Main Street, which is a Group 3 individual landmark. The request is for a certificate of design approval for exterior changes and preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill. This is a circa 1870s building that has had a number of facade changes over the years, the latest of which was from the 1980s. A lot of that stucco has been removed to reveal the 1937 upper story. The first floor has still has not been exposed yet, but we don't believe there's any integrity left from 1937. The current proposal is to restore the second floor of the facade, open up windows along the private alleyway along the south elevation, and to alter the exterior elevation, which is visible from Sumter Street, as you can see in the top right corner there. These are some photographs. The top left is from a 1937 news article showing some limited visibility of the storefront. And then the bottom is actually from the 1940s, which shows that there was an alteration to the storefront, an application of probably vitrolite or Carrera glass on the columns and the clerestory, which runs above the awnings. The request at this time is to return the facade to the 1940s appearance. At the time that this was listed as a landmark with DDRC, it was the understanding it would go back to the 1937 appearance, although it was still under JCPenney's ownership of this time, so it's still within a period of significance for the building. So at present, the drawings that you actually have in your packet are not detailed enough to show what this storefront is being proposed as. So what we're basically going to do is, if you're comfortable, we would make recommendations that you would defer the restoration of that storefront to staff as well as other details on the rear. The rear is not going to have the elevator tower that's shown on the drawings, so that's going to be different as well. That's the reason this was not put on the consent agenda, just because the drawings are not quite up to date to the latest information we have, and also because we're going to a different facade than 1937. So staff finds that the project generally complies with section 17698 of the city ordinance and recommends preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill with the following conditions. The storefront and rear wall details be submitted for review by staff, and that staff may return this project to DDRC for further review if necessary. When those details are available, the project meeting or exceeding the 20% investment threshold requirements for qualified rehabilitation expenses, all work meeting the standards for work as outlined in section 17698, and all details deferred to staff. And in a separate motion, we would also recommend a certificate of design approval for the project as proposed based on its conformance with section 17674D of the city ordinance with the following conditions. The storefront and rear walls details be submitted for review by staff, and that staff may return this project to DDRC for further review if necessary when those details are available, and all details deferred to staff. Do you have any questions for staff at this time?
Okay, no questions coming at this time from the commission. I will again reiterate for clarification what we're looking at, and we will be asking for two motions here. One for the Bailey Bill for 1634 Main Street, and the second for the design approval as well. Are the principals here, and would they like to make a presentation or offer any comments?
Were you?
Excellent, excellent.
Support for the staff. They've been wonderful in getting us up to speed and helping us achieve our intent of making a vibrant, historically accurate contribution to Main Street. So, thank you.
Well, thank you. Is there anyone here in the audience who would like to speak in support or opposition of this project? Ma'am, please step forward, and have you signed in?
I will.
Please do so.
I'm Martha Fowler, and I'm a frequent flyer for DDRC longer than y'all have been on the, there's no pen. But anyway, oh, there is a pen. I just want you to know that I am so impressed with these young men. I wish they were my children, because they are doing exactly what needs to be done, and I'm so proud of them. And I just couldn't be more thrilled to have them in the neighborhood. So that's all I wanted to say. Please approve them, because they are amazing young men.
Thank you very much, and that is comment and support of this project. I believe we have one other. Please step forward. Okay, would you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth in these proceedings?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. If you'll just give me a moment here, we want to make note that we have one other commissioner having joined us, Mr. Hyler, added to the commission for the meeting. Please.
Thank you, Chairman, Commissioners. I am Matt Kennel with the City Center Partnership, and I'd like to echo Martha Fowler's comments. We are very excited about these gentlemen bringing this great project to the Main Street District. We think it's a great contributor to peel off the onion, if you will, and expose the historic character of that building and do it in such a fine way. So we are very supportive and hope this will get approved.
Thank you very much, sir. Is there anyone here else who would like to speak, either in support or opposition? Okay, there being none, any discussion by the commission?
Stacy, can you go back one slide? You indicated the 1940s. That's the upper left-hand.
No, I'm sorry, the 1940s is the bottom, and also on the right, you can just see a sliver of the building on the left. On the far right photograph, it's the building on the left. You can see the black has been applied to the column and just above the awning.
That black, you indicated there was uncertainty as to what that was. What's the intent to go back with some
a material that approximates a vitrolite Carrera, which would have been the popular storefront application at the time. And Andy Chandler has done some additional research and concurs. He's retired from the State Preservation Office, and he's here, and has done some excellent research on this, and that's also been his summary, I think.
Mr. Chandler, would you like to add anything? Raise your right hand. Do you affirm to provide the truth in your testimony? Yes. Thank you very much. Step forward, if you will, and
I don't have that much to say, but anyway, I'm thrilled to be a part of this project, and Freeman and Ben have asked me to assist them with this. I worked for many years for Department of Archives and History, managing the National Register program here in South Carolina, and was at the state office when the downtown of the Commercial Historic District was listed in the National Register and was nominated. And I remember when Freeman asked me about this building to start with, I said, well, it's non-contributing. And but then we've been talking since that time, and he's been so good about doing the right thing by this building and peeling off the layers, and we're very happy to be able to try to turn this building into a contributing property. And in fact, next Friday, the 18th of November, I'll be making a presentation to the State Review Board to actually switch this from a non-contributing property to a contributing property. So,
great. Well, thank you very much, sir.
happy to be a part of it.
Before you step down, would you please sign the
Oh, yes.
roster there? Well, thank you. I think we have had great testimony. There's no one here in opposition to speak against this project. I will ask if there's no other deliberation by commission. Am I correct in assuming that? Is there a motion therefore to accept on the first behalf for the Bailey bill, or to motion for Bailey bill request?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that for 1634 Main Street, we recommend that granting the preliminary certification for the Bailey bill according to staff recommendation.
Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? There's no discussion. Will you call the roll, please, for a vote?
Yes.
Ms. Grant? Yes.
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 Yes. Very good. We have an approval for Bailey bill of the 1634 Main Street request. That takes us to the design approval or request for exterior changes. Is there any further presentation desired at this point for that portion of the request? There being none, any discussion by commission?
Mr. Chairman, I support the idea. I was just a little uncertain when they said the rear, what looks like a stairwell and elevator tower would not be a part. In other words, the drawings that we have been submitted are not quite right. So is that important for this body to see what they do plan to do? Or is that just something the staff can work out with the developers?
From what I've understood from the presentation by staff, if I may, they are willing to
Take on that.
to take that on as we defer it to them. Am I right, ma'am?
Yes, and then we had some language in here that we would return it to you if we didn't find the updated drawings to be in keeping with the landmark language and all that. So we might be bringing it back to you, but might not. Depends on how they work out the rear.
What's the forecast? Are they going to put anything back there, or is it all going to be internal to the building, or we don't know yet?
I believe it'll be internal to the building from my last understanding.
I can just say of the original
Thank you. Any other discussion or questions or comments? Okay, there being none, I guess we will call for a motion for the design approval or request for exterior changes to 1634 Main Street.
Mr. Chairman, I make the motion that we grant a certificate of approval for 1634 Main Street based on the recommendations of the staff listed and also upon further review of the staff for the proposed design.
Thank you very much, sir. Is there a second? Any further discussion? Call the roll, please, for a vote.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes. Very good, thank you. Thank you, folks. That'll take us to the next historic portion of the agenda, and that is a request for certificate of design approval for changes to design for new construction for a single-family home at 1420 Haygood. We'll make a note that Mr. Savory has recused himself from this portion of the agenda.
Okay. This is a lot that will be subdivided from an existing house at 1420 Haygood for the construction of a new two-story building that was approved by DDRC 2 months ago with a number of conditions. This is a location of the property. The part of the building that you can see here will be taken off to allow for lot space in order to construct the new building. One of the conditions of approval was that the proposed vinyl windows either be replaced with a window consistent with the guidelines or that they be concealed entirely by an exterior window that meets the guidelines as determined by staff. The building that's being proposed is a highly energy efficient building that's composed of a panel system. It should be noted that the guidelines are not subject to the limitations of a particular building system decided upon by an owner. The guidelines listed here were requested by the neighborhood and are particularly designed to ensure that new construction reinforces historic patterns. The applicant is now proposing essentially a very similar window configuration. This is just a site plan and rendering of the facade, just as a reminder of the building. And this was what was proposed at the time that the evaluation was written. Staff's concerns when reading the guidelines for materials, texture, and details for new construction, it does say to use materials, textures, and architectural features that are visually compatible with those of historic buildings on the block or street. When selecting architectural details, consider the scale, placement, profile, and relief of details on surrounding structures for the basis of design decisions. If horizontal siding is to be used, consider the board size, width of exposure, length, and trim details such as corner boards on adjacent historic structures for specifications of the new material. This level of detail indicates that there should be some consideration of the kinds of details that would show up even on siding. And so we would consider the same sort of detail to be showing up on on windows that are proposed in a historic building. We would note that on other new construction in the district, people have had to install windows that look like historic windows. This is the latest drawing provided after you received your evaluations. So the differences here address some of the staff concerns. One of the issues was that the stiles, which is the vertical on the sides of the windows in the original drawing were much wider on the bottom window, which is actually not a bottom, but it is a casement that is set behind a top sash that is a wood puttied sash, is wider than the top sash, and that is not a historic pattern in any way in this neighborhood. The new drawing addresses some of that width issue and minimizes the stile width for the bottom window or the casement. The bottom part of the horizontal part is also much taller than historic wood windows proportion-wise. And that seems to have been somewhat minimized. Another issue with the proposed window, as you can see in the top right, which is a facsimile of what's being proposed, which is a casement window. What's really being proposed, the bottom right, aluminum clad. As you can see that in comparison and contrast to a historic window, that the most visible part of this casement window, which will be the bottom sash, has additional detailing that is not consistent with historic wood windows, because as you can see here, rails are a simple, smooth piece of wood. They don't have the additional gaskets and ledges and things that are visible in the proposed window. These are just some two-story houses with photographs taken from the public right-of-way. You can see details of windows from the street, so this will be visible. This particular house will be on a corner lot in that the adjacent property is a abandoned street, so it will be visible. This is new construction that the DDRC approved on Haygood last year. And you can see the details of the aluminum clad windows that were put into this building, which are very consistent with historic wood windows in the neighborhood. Because the proposed windows do not appear to match the profiles and relief of details of historic buildings in the area, staff recommends a denial.
All right, well, thank you very much, ma'am. I believe the applicant is here. Would you like to come forward, sir? You've been sworn in, I believe, and signed the roster there.
I've been sworn in, and I sign in.
Thank you.
Anyway, in introduction, I'll introduce myself. My name is John McLean. I'm the homeowner. I'm also an architect here in town. As a little bit of background on myself, the reason I'm pursuing this option is the goal of the house is to build an historic neighborhood and to have it be a net zero house. Most of you were here 2 months ago, so you saw this. So I do respectfully disagree with staff's interpretation on this. In reading through the portion of the comments from staff, every single comment that addressed this project addressed portion 9, materials, textures, and details. But I want to read pertinent sections for guidelines. Section 5, new construction, the principles. Typically, when you include principles in a document, those are the important parts. This is the principles. These are the guiding principles. And for this project, I'll read them. Within this district, there are numerous vacant lots and non-contributing structures. The construction of new or replacement structures in these lots will greatly affect the district by either reinforcing or undermining existing historic patterns. New construction should be consistent with existing buildings along the street in terms of height. That's already been approved by this committee. Scale, proportion, and rhythm of openings, setbacks, orientation, and spacing. All that's been approved already. However, new buildings need not imitate past architectural styles to be successful infill. They may reflect the era of their own construction while using significant themes such as heights, materials, roof form, massing, setbacks, and rhythm of openings to ensure that a new building blends in with its context. It is hoped that the new construction of today will be contemporary and contextual so that it will be worthy of the affection and designation of future residents. It's been said, probably it's just a slip of the tongue, that this is a historic building. This is not a historic building. This is a new building, a brand new building. This is a building that's designed, built 2016, 2017. And the intent clearly stated in the guidelines is the hope that new construction today will be contemporary and contextual, that it will be worthy of the affection and designation of future residents. And in the first paragraph of Stacy's comments, she says, the guidelines listed here were requested by the neighborhood and are particularly designed to ensure that new construction reinforces historic patterns. It does not use the word recreate. It does not use the term match perfectly. If you go to, I don't know who's running the slideshow, if you go to the aluminum clad windows that are improved and installed on the new houses down the street. So This window right here, this has been approved by this body. It is an aluminum window. So it does not comply with the materials that are consistent on historic buildings. It's an aluminum window because it is contextual, it's contemporary. Now, if you actually look at this window, this is the house that's moved into. Next door to it is the house that has not yet been sold. That's the one I went up and looked at. I didn't trespass. So if you look at this window, you will see that the parting bead between the top sash and the bottom sash, it's a piece of sheet metal. It's not a half-inch by half-inch parting bead like you would see on a traditional solid wood putty glaze window. It is a modern window. It has double pane insulated glass. You see at it from any oblique angle, and you see the silver spacing. You also note this is I think an Anderson window probably. It has a deep reveal that conceals the mechanical action inside of it. That is not something that you would see on a traditional window. So this window, what I am saying is that the windows that I'm proposing, they are being held to a much higher standard than this window. I don't want to assume that if I presented this window, it would also be recommended by staff that it be denied, because it is also, it's a departure. All right. But what I'm saying is, it should be a departure. There is nothing in the guidelines that says that you must recreate historic wood windows on a new house. All it merely says in a historic district is that it should be compatible. It should be similar. Well, what does that mean? The only thing that we have is the guidelines. Now, I have worked as an architect on many historic registered buildings. I've done window projects and worked on a lot of buildings that are not individually listed, but they're in historic districts. And what we have always gone back to is you should differentiate between what's new and what's old. If you're putting an addition on a true historic, this is not a historic building, but a true historic building, you want the addition to be respectful and similar, but it should not mimic. It should not mimic. In fact, that's not we'd like it not to, but it says in historic preservation, that's best practices that's followed around this country. You should not mimic exactly what has been done. So I did a little research, and I found a couple articles. The way, how do you interpret? Ultimately, I'm asking you to side with me in the interpretation of this document and to not side with staff. And so a few things that I found. The 1967 Venice Charter, considered the founding document for modern preservation movement, declares that the purpose of conserving and restoring historic monuments is to safeguard them no less as works of art than as historic evidence. But it also says any addition to the landmark must be distinct from the architectural composition and must bear a contextual stamp. From that document, we have the Secretary of Interior Standards. Andy is very familiar with Secretary of Interior Standards. I guess he's moved to the front row. The standard for rehabilitation specifically says the new work should be differentiated from the old and shall be compatible with the massing, size, scale, and architectural features to protect the historic integrity of the property and the environment. And there's another article that I found as well that basically says new additions should be designed and constructed so that the character-defining features of the historic building are not radically changed, obscured, damaged, or destroyed in the process of rehabilitation. New design should always be clearly differentiated so that the addition does not appear to be part of the historic resource. Now, the first slide that Stacia showed, the one that had the wider styles, this one, this right here, I would argue vehemently that this should also be approved. This is an aluminum-clad wood window. 2 months ago, I was here, and it was basically said, we've never approved a vinyl-clad window in the building. This is the hill we're going to die on. And, that didn't get passed. I can accept that. So I'm back with an aluminum-clad wood window. It does what I needed to do. It provides the air tightness and energy efficiency that I need for the goals for this house. And it is, even in this state, with the rails and the styles not being a perfect match to a historic true wood double hung window, I would argue that that is contextual. It is very similar to what you would see on the street, and from the street is a very, very fine, fine details to differentiate. So, but I genuinely want to, try to fit in. I do want this to be approved. I want to bend over backwards to try to get this into such a configuration that that the least number of people take issue with it. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see I've changed the rails, or the styles are both 2 inches. The rails at the bottom, I put a piece there so that it essentially looks like a 3-inch piece. And I've matched everything that I possibly can on here. Now, if you tell me that this little piece that's a little drip edge down at the bottom, for that one reason, this is going to be denied, then why are these inaccurate historic replicas down the street from Peller or Anderson or whatever that leak 2 or 3 times as much as this window, why are they approved and this is denied? I mean, I feel like this is an interpretive overreach.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Let me just ask, before I ask anyone else who would like to speak in opposition or favor of this request, let me just ask, you started at the outset here of your presentation reminding us that your house is new and not a historic
Yes, sir. Brand new.
house. Thank you.
Nothing in it's old.
Okay. The evidence you were presenting towards the end was certainly quoting historic properties. So that's the reason I'm asking that question, just to clarify.
I don't understand your question. I'm sorry. What's your?
Well, it really wasn't a question.
Oh, okay.
Your evidence that you presented quoted historic properties and added additions to
Most of them address new additions to
historic.
buildings.
Right, but yours is a new property, and I'm
It
just
is.
making sure that that's
Totally.
clear to all the
Right.
commission. Thank you.
Could we get him to just very quickly
Sure.
reread the paragraph or whatever about the interpretive nature of new construction within a historic district?
Is that the
About
first-
your second train of thought that you gave us.
Are you asking me to reread the principles section
Yeah.
of these guidelines?
I think it was, yeah.
So I think when you get into the crux of it, new construction shall be consistent with existing buildings along a street in terms of height, scale, proportion, and rhythm of openings, setbacks, orientation, and spacing. However, new buildings need not imitate past architectural styles to be successful infill. They may reflect the era of their own construction while using significant themes such as height, materials, roof form, massing, setback, and rhythm of openings to ensure that a new building blends in with its context. It is hoped that the new construction of today will be contemporary and contextual so that it will be worthy of the affection and designation of future residents. If I'd put normal double-hung Pella windows on this, there would be nothing that's really unique or worthy of affection or designation of future residents. If it's the first net zero home in Columbia, I think that's something that's worth noting.
Thank you. Is there anyone here who would like to speak in favor or opposition from the audience, please? Thank you, sir.
My name is Betsy Camerlin. I'd like to speak in favor. I live right down the street on the other end of Haygood. I also served on this commission and have looked at a lot of windows and their proposals over the years. A lot of them have been denied, and I fully support denying vinyl, inappropriate windows in historic areas. But I think what the client, and if you could go to the one that he is currently proposing, I think achieving the energy efficiency that this window will achieve with these type of proportions should be commended. I mean, he has truly bent over backwards to try and fit the character of the neighborhood, but also achieve something that is really where our country should be headed. You know, conserving energy, fitting in, doing something unique. The whole reason I moved to this neighborhood is because of the diversity of architecture. There are unique houses in this neighborhood that are repeated nowhere else in the city. This is new construction. These are not replacement windows. They should be honored for doing what he is doing here. And I can't state strongly enough that I think this commission, the staff, does a wonderful job in interpreting these guidelines, but this in no way will undermine the character of our beautiful neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cameron. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? You've been sworn in, I believe. Please. Thank you, ma'am.
My name is Pam Hunt. I live at 1427 Haygood, directly across the street from Mr. McLean's property. I have lived in Melrose Heights for about 20 years now, and I am one of the residents who sought to have your oversight and protection, because I believe that we need to keep the charm and beauty of these old neighborhoods in Columbia. I'm a Columbia native. I'm an old Columbia native, and I've seen a lot disappear in my lifetime. My main concern is that the windows look like other windows in our neighborhood. I'm not an architect. I don't know all of this that Stacy, all of that detail. But I think we're already going to have a house built that looks like no other house in the neighborhood. It blends a lot or a number of historic features, but there is no other house that looks like it. So it's already going to be different than what the neighborhood looks like. And my belief going into architectural preservation, conservation status, was that we would try to maintain the overall flavor and integrity, architectural integrity of the neighborhood. Like some other places in Columbia, I know inner city, you ride through and there's rainbow houses and all sorts of things that more overshadow the historic structures there. Windows, as we all know, are just the most visible, one of the most visible and prominent features on a house. And certainly in these old historic buildings and homes, they are very, very important. I understand wanting to make the most energy efficient decisions possible. We all need to do that, and God knows we all want lower power bills. But that is not the overriding mission of the guidelines and rules that we've put in place. Those rules and the oversight of this committee really first and foremost deal with architectural historic preservation. And I appreciate all the work that you have done thus far on this. Our neighborhood's beautiful. Those new houses look great. And I just urge you to continue remembering what the mission is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. We have someone else who would like to speak. Please come forward.
I'm Martha Fowler. Y'all know. Been here before. I have to say that my grandparents bought the house that I live in 1941. I came to this house in 1951. I have been in and out of that house and owned it for 65 years. This neighborhood is very, very, very important to me. The character of our neighborhood has already changed by the decision you made 2 months ago. With the decision, our particular area of Melrose Heights is totally different than all of Melrose Heights. It has very large lots. It has very distinguished houses. Every house is different. Every house has loving character. Every house is just really cool. I love my neighborhood. I'm asking you to please stay. I mean, I wasn't in favor of the decision you made. We brought 12 families and asked you not to agree to do it. You did it anyway. We're going to live with what y'all said, but you said that he had to do the things that he has to do, and I want you to stick to it. I have been working with city staff for years on multiple different projects. I can't say enough things about how hard those folks work. They are amazing. Every one of them does fabulous work. Please pay attention to them and honor what they have said and honor what I live right across the street from that house. You know, I have a $475 power bill. I don't care. I love my house. You know, I don't care. It's not I don't give a whether or not he makes money on his house. I care about the flavor of my neighborhood, and, you know, I've been there 65 years. Please don't make it any worse than it already is. It is absolutely a fabulous neighborhood. Please come over. We would love to have you. Our particular 2 blocks have great, I could build 2 houses on my lot in a heartbeat, but I would never do that to my neighborhood or to my neighbors. And I would never put on something that doesn't work. We fought very hard to have this designation. Please help us hold it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor or opposition of the request? There being none, sir, you have an opportunity to rebut the presentations that have been made. We're going to keep you to 5 minutes here, please.
I don't know I have a whole lot to rebut. And essentially, we're talking about the very, very, very detailed profiles in one little portion of this window. From the street, 99.9% of people will walk by, stroll by, go by, bike by, glance over and say, oh, it's a house. It's got double hung windows. If someone really stops and really looks and really squints, I might not have tricked their eye. But this is a brand new house. This is a brand new house. And I am not beholden by these guidelines to recreate history, to fake it. I am trying to make it look as contextual and fit in as much as possible. It pains me that there has been so much controversy on the project. But, I mean, ultimately, I'm not doing something wrong. I own some land. I have the desire to. I have children who want to move into a house with an upstairs bedroom. I also spend $400 and some a month, and I don't have to. I have the opportunity to build a new house, and I can build it in such a way that it's contemporary and contextual, and it is deserving. And I hope in the future it will be deserving of designation.
Thank you, sir. Okay. We've had all presentations and rebuttal. We have had presentations both in support and opposition. Now we'll go into deliberation. Let me open this deliberation for the benefit of all by repeating what was made in the introduction to the meeting here today, that all motions and decisions of this commission are made while applying all of the facts to all of the guidelines. The guidelines here which apply are specifically related to the Architectural Conservation District of Melrose Heights and Oak Lawn. Now, I'm going to offer my first comments, if I may. We've had quotes from the guidelines by the applicant, and they are duly noted, and I appreciate, number one, your presentation of those, sir, and your interpretation of them. I also applaud your desire to have an energy-efficient home. The guidelines also, though, include in section 5B6 the following: rhythm of openings, which says, construct new buildings so that the relationship of width to height of windows and doors and the rhythm of solids, meaning walls, to voids, door and window openings is visually compatible with historic buildings on the block or street, that these maintain a similar ratio of height to width in the bays of facade, and it goes on to say, do not introduce incompatible facade patterns that upset the rhythm of openings established in surrounding structures. Now, I put this out here for further discussion by commission.
I have a question, not necessarily on the specifics that you just read, but I was not present at the meeting 2 months ago when the decisions were made regarding this property. It appears that these particular windows were not considered at that point, or there were another set of windows that were.
Stacy will answer that for you.
So at the previous meeting, it was the window in the upper right corner here, but also with the application of this top sash for the top half. So it was essentially the same window, but it was
same
vinyl.
discussions were held.
But what was
Same issue.
presented before was the upper left as a drawing.
Yeah, would you
No, I'm sorry, this isn't.
comparison of the two drawings? I think that's a little more clear.
Yeah, just, Will, just a second. So the upper drawing, I'm sorry, and it's not showing up well for you here, but that was it was trying to shade, it didn't show up here, but the difference in width between this style and this style, but that's not what's being asked now, because after this was published, the applicant changed the drawing
2 inch.
to this, which I think you have.
Stacey, would you just kind of toggle between the two to
Yes.
show the
So this was the one you got previously, and then this is the current.
So, but to your point about the rhythm of openings, that's been approved, correct? Because the placement of the windows and the size of the openings was approved.
Correct.
Right. And I think he, in my opinion, he has done a good job of introducing on a new structure to be sympathetic with the neighborhood and try to address those kind of things as rhythm and style and placement of windows and proportion even. So that is what we approved the last time, and I think it still is there today. Seems to me, what we're talking about today is he had a particular window type with the composite, not the composition of the window, but the actual construction of the window.
Vinyl.
That had wider styles and that maybe weren't proportionally correct or even in keeping with the neighborhood. And that would be represented somewhat by the picture on the upper left. And the staff, or we didn't like that, so we said, take a look at it, come back with a different solution. Is that true? Am I heading down the right way?
Till that last sentence, well, not that we don't like, but we don't find that it meets the
Yeah,
guidelines
okay.
because of the
Right.
difference.
You can't say we like it or we don't like it.
Correct.
It's
That
that it didn't meet the flavor of the ordinance.
Right, so we were actually proposing that you would maintain your previous motion, which simply stated that they would either replace the proposed windows with a window consistent with the guidelines, or that they be concealed entirely by an exterior window. So that would be not just a top sash that he's proposing, but an entire top and bottom sash that would look exactly like any other historic window. So that was what your motion allowed. So we were proposing denial of this motion to maintain the previous motion. And I would note that this does a fine job from the street of looking like the central historic window here.
Would you go back to the last photograph of the new house? So, how about the window we see on the neighboring house?
They're the same, but they're raised. Those bottom sashes are open.
Double hung window? Yeah, so look over at the
big,
blown
the blow
up.
up. Keep going.
Okay, come on down.
Other
Yeah,
picture.
Other
bottom
picture.
picture.
Other picture.
Bottom picture. There, yeah.
That's just the windows open.
Okay.
A little bit of a small
Okay,
rail,
now
but
go
it's
to the
smooth.
drawings that he presented more recently.
Okay. This one here.
That one. And this is his effort to try to make it more compatible in width and style and everything.
Well, the changes here are to the width of the stiles and I guess the height of the rail. It does not address the fact that both the top and bottom sash do not match each other. Those are very different windows because you're combining two different windows and two different materials. But historically, top and bottom sashes do not suddenly change to a different design on the bottom sash. This building, I would note that this will be visible from the public right away because this photo is taken from not even from the edge of the street, but in the street, and you can tell details about a window if this wasn't reduced for size, but
So what type of window are we proposing? Is that a double hung window, or is it a stationary piece and a casement piece?
correct, a stationary top sash in front of a casement.
Okay, because a double hung window would not be energy efficient. Is that right?
I think in this particular
So you're trying to take a casement window and make it look like a double hung window.
I am not, but the applicant is, yes.
I mean, is that the gist of it?
I think so. I think the idea is
I mean,
to
I
make it
think
look like
he's
double.
done an admirable job of trying to make it fit into the neighborhood as best he can.
Yeah, and I mean, I would argue, or I would interpret the guidelines to say that it needs to be contextual but not recreate. And I think that this does
Exactly. I
match
think,
contextually.
again, I agree with you.
Any other commissioners have thoughts?
I don't think we've ever seen this much detail on a window ever in a
Agreed.
presentation
Yeah.
in my life in DDRC. I've never seen so much information.
Speak into the,
Excuse me. And so to compare this to some of the other presentations we've had is really apples to oranges. If we looked at the details of some of the proved windows, they would be nothing like a historic window anyway. And so I feel like
Well, I'm sorry, that's not necessarily true. Staff does look at these details. This is what was built. We do have people build things that look like historic windows.
stop right there. The right-hand window is an aluminum-clad window. Is that
Yes.
correct? And it has a recessed slot in the side that you can see from the street. Is that right?
A recessed slot where?
Meaning, I mean, I could stand up and point it out, but there's a guide in the left-hand and right-hand side of that window that you can see from the street at an oblique angle that the track runs up and down in. It's part of.
That mimics a historical wood stop if you look at,
What is that made of?
it's probably aluminum clad, just like the rest of the window. It comes as a unit, but this is a stop.
Sure. What I'm actually referring to is the track that's behind that stop that you can see in 3 dimensions that you can't see in.
The parting bead that's half an inch that blends in with the vertical style.
Well, we're debating halves of inches.
Yeah,
I guess
I
my
agree with that.
point is, typically we don't get this much information, and we're reviewing it based on an incredible level of detail.
Yeah.
And my concern is that when we get to this level of detail, we're never again going to see this again. So we have.
Well, this is not a double hung window.
I agree with you.
I mean, this is an unusual situation. They're not proposing a double hung.
This is also the most unusual
Yeah.
submittal I think I've ever seen.
And I mean, I think it's also fair that to say that building a net zero house is an unusual situation as well, and blending it contextually with the neighborhood can be a very difficult challenge, and I think they've achieved that.
Well, you would have to interpret that within the guidelines.
I was just gonna,
If
go on.
if I may then, because right now we're looking at, let's see, going back to section 5. I'm looking for the specifics that we're trying to match, such as, let's see, new buildings need not imitate past architectural styles to be successfully infill. They may reflect the era of their own construction while using significant themes such as height, which the window height matches. Materials, we have already approved aluminum clad wood windows. Roof form is not in consideration. Massing, the shape of the window is roughly the same in massing. I agree, there are profiles that are different, but the massing is the same. Setback, we've talked about the detail. He's got exact dimensions of how far the top sash is set back, the bottom sash, the casement, all of that. Setbacks are all part of it, even though setback in this context is actually referring to the building. I'll interpret it as loosely as possible. Rhythm of openings. The window rhythm is a building elevation. We've already approved. The rhythm of top and bottom sash, if you really want to get specific, is similar to a historic window. Ensure that new building blends with its context. We're not really referring to building a blending, but if we get really detailed, does this window blend with a similar double hung? I would believe it does. It is hoped that the new construction of today will be contemporary and contextual. To argue that we have to use a historic material is kind of contrary to that contemporary and contextual line, so that it will be worthy of the affection and designation of future residents.
But that is a principle you need to continue reading with the
Okay.
guideline.
I will keep continuing. Use materials, which materials we've already discussed. Aluminum clad has already been approved. Textures, I assume the aluminum cladding is still the same texture as the other aluminum cladding?
I would argue that the texture created by the additional gasketing around the framing of this casement doesn't match the texture of a wood window. But that's my interpretation.
What is texture? I mean, I think of it as
Well,
texture.
we can each
Okay.
determine it differently.
All right. Well, then we might come back to texture. Architectural features that are visually compatible with those of historic buildings. I think that's probably the one that's most in question on the block or street. So, when selecting architectural details, consider the scale. Again, we've got more information about scale of this window than I think I've ever seen. But in general, it's the same, 2-inch side rails, sill stoop. For the most part, the dimensions and scale are comparable. Placement, am I correct that that really refers to window placement and not the placement of the details? Profile, again, that gets back to probably textures. What is your definition of profile? But I agree that profile is probably different on what's exposed. Relief of details, so it's probably same profile and relief of details. Surrounding structures for the basis of design decisions. So that's referencing the surrounding buildings as it applies to this one, correct?
Yes,
So we're looking at the
surrounding
buildings on the same block as the context?
The first line actually says block or street, so that would probably
Okay.
hold through.
And then the next line gets into horizontal siding, board size, exposure length, so that's really.
None of
referring
which
to-
are being considered
So,
here.
so out of all of that, I think what's been questioned in this is then textures, profile, and relief of details. And is that what we're really down to?
Is there another section that's just specific on windows?
That is the.
I expressed that earlier as
So there's
section
another one that was just the
5.6,
overall new construction.
section 5B6.
No, this is the only section referring,
For new construction.
that would refer to windows, yeah,
Right.
for new construction. As far as,
So-
yeah, instead of rhythm of opening.
So I'm still gonna make the argument that first sentence says visually compatible. That does not mean mirror image or exact replica.
We have as a board, used replica as our standard. I mean, we have as a board often said.
Let me just correct you here. Our standard, though we have had interpretations and decisions that were based otherwise, our standard is the actual guideline. No other standard have we used. We have had interpretations and then based decisions based perhaps otherwise. But please, if you're going to use the word standard, our guidelines and ordinances are the standard by which we make our decisions, should be. And again, I'm just going to hearken back to the latter section of these guidelines, section 5B6. which says, "Do not introduce incompatible facade patterns that upset the rhythm of openings established in surrounding structures." So I in fact agree with everything that you've pointed out here in terms of the details of the windows, even the materials that are being utilized here and presented. I think what our decision and interpretation of guidelines relative to any decision or motion here is more so related to the contemporary, new, relative to street visualization of windows that either we interpret as fitting into the surrounding structures in this district based on the guidelines that are specific to that district. Anyone else have any suggestions or comments?
Okay.
Or would you like to respond?
We're talking about micro and macro scales, and the hard thing is the guidelines are mostly about the macro scale of rhythm and scale and proportion and
Appropriateness.
and a lot of what we're debating here is in a section detail. And it's,
Understood.
And so I'm having a hard time defining at what point does what's been presented, deviate from what is allowed in our guidelines. And I agree, it's nothing like what we've been shown before. But if our only rule or tool of interpretation is just the guidelines, I'm having a very hard time finding enough detail in the guidelines
So I think that the detail is really what's key here. So if you were to take the windows out of it completely and say we were approving a brick building that showed a soldier course, we've never dictated if it's going to be a 4-inch vertical brick or a 6-inch vertical brick. We approve that there's a soldier course and that contextually matches the area. And I think at this point, we're being asked to approve a detail that's so minute that we've already approved rhythm and massing and opening and scale. We've approved materials. I think it does contextually fit into the neighborhood as per the guidelines.
Okay.
So can we have a motion?
If
Is it
everyone
time for
is
a motion?
comfortable and has no other comment, no further discussion, then we will ask for a motion.
Well, I will give it a try, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Based on the principles of Section 5 of the Melrose Heights and Oak Lawn District ordinances or guidelines. I make the motion that we accept and approve the drawings as resubmitted by the applicant for 1420 Haygood Avenue, based on our interpretation of the intent of the guidelines.
Second.
We have a second. We have a motion to approve this request and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, would you call the roll, please, for a vote? No.
No.
Yes.
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 No. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. We now will move forward with, that takes us to other business with SCANA, Site Mixed Use Informational Presentation.
Okay, this is an informational presentation, so no action will be taken on this. The project is at 1409 UG Street. This is the former SCANA bus barn property. The proposal is for a mixed-use development to include a 30,000 square foot grocery store with 177 residential units above, 10,000 square feet of amenity space and leasing space, freestanding retail space of about 12,500 square feet, and a combination of structured and surface parking. This project is currently in the process of rezoning from M2DD to C3DD. Staff have met with the applicants a number of times and have provided feedback relative to the city center design development guidelines. The site has a number of significant challenges, including a large subsurface storm drain easement, a sanitary sewer line easement, and a number of wide overhead power line easements that connect to the adjacent substation. Given these limitations that prevent it from meeting some of the guidelines, the site planning guidelines, it is imperative that the guidelines, which can be met, do not fall short. This is, again, an informational presentation. They plan to come for site plan review and design review next month. So, but I think the architects are here to kind of present the drawings and get some feedback from you guys before they come for a decision. Come on up.
Well, please raise your right hand, and we'll do so.
For information purposes.
For information purposes, we simply want to make sure judiciously that you are going to present all things. Do you affirm to tell the truth? Thank you very much. State your name and proceed.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Chris Casina. I'm one of the architects with Studio Architects that is working on behalf of Southeastern Development on this mixed-use project. And Lucinda has given you a brief overview. I don't know what order this is going to come in, but generally speaking, this is the vacant site that is between UG Street and the SCANA substation. The northern edge faces Hampton Street. And as Lucinda